Have you ever been on a plane and wondered, gosh, this is really slow. I wish it could go faster. I can't bear sitting on an airplane. Well, they actually did go faster, but almost 40 years ago now. Planes were ballistically fast, but as technology improved and time went on, planes got slower, which sounds sort of ironic, doesn't it? But they got slower for three reasons: the sun, the cost, and the sonic booms. Let's get into it. So I guess to kind of begin this segment, we have to first say how fast planes really go. And well, planes, they are very fast compared to like cars or trains or really anything out there right now, or even boats. Boats are really slow. But planes travel at around 500 miles per hour on average, some slower, some slightly faster, but that's around the ballpark, 500 miles per hour. And back in the 40s, or not the 40s, back 40 years ago, uh, we had something called the Concorde. As many of you might know, this was the fastest passenger jet in history, even today. And that plane went around 1,200 miles per hour, which was so fast. You could get from New York to London in 3 hours, when on a normal plane it took like 6 to 7 hours. And, planes were incredibly quick. And, just to show, there are planes today that go quite fast. So we have like basic F-16s, right? Those planes are used by the military on a daily basis. And they traveled around 1,500 miles per hour, so 300 miles per hour faster than the Concorde, and they're used regularly. We also had something called the SR-71 Blackbird. That plane went 2,500 miles per hour, but it has been said to go a lot faster, but that's either classified or not given to the public, or it's just made up. I'm not quite sure. Then NASA went on to make two more planes, sort of. We have the X-15, which went 4,200 miles per hour, and that plane was essentially just a rocket with a cockpit. Like, Neil Armstrong, who also went to the moon, he flew that plane, and there's a story that one time he was flying it over Nevada, and it went so quick, so fast, that the plane started to get so hot, and it started shaking, and it actually lost control for a little bit, and because it was flying so quickly, by the time he fixed everything and got it all good and got control of the plane again, he was in California, and he had to circle back. That's how quick this thing was. With the plane, you would have still been in Nevada. After this, NASA wanted to test how quick they could possibly make a plane. So they made something called the scramjet. The scramjet was unmanned. No man has ever gone in it. No man was piloting it. It was all remote, based off of on-site controls. And that plane went 7,000 miles per hour. Like, that's ridiculously fast. And what's the even more crazy part is that was slow for that plane. NASA had actually predicted or rated it to go 11,000 miles per hour. Just like, imagine that, 11,000 miles per hour soaring through the air. And the only reason why they didn't achieve that speed was they didn't have enough time to test it. And so when you think about that, if you go based off any of these planes, they substantially decrease the time it takes to get anywhere. Like, if you go 11,000 miles per hour, or even 7,000 miles per hour, which is ridiculously fast, you could get from like a state like California, for instance, all the way to like London in just an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours if it's really slow for some reason. And that's a huge difference, because right now it takes around 11 hours to travel to anywhere to Europe from like more the western side of America. And so this change is incredible, right? But why do planes only go 500 miles per hour? And the first part is the harmful rays from the sun. So planes like the Concorde and all these planes I just mentioned, like the SR-71 Blackbird, the F-16s, they all fly at heights of like 50,000 plus feet in the air. The SR-71 Blackbird flies around 85,000 feet in the air. The Concorde flew 60,000 feet in the air, and most F-16s fly around, they fly around 55,000 feet in the air. And so these are all incredibly high heights. And when you look at an airplane, like a basic passenger airplane, like a Boeing 737, for instance, their maximum roof height they're supposed to go is around 38,000 feet in the air. And the difference really is just the thickness of the air. So when a plane is flying at 51,000 feet or 85,000 feet, the air is substantially thinner than it is at, say, 38,000 feet, right? And that's just because there's less air in the atmosphere, so it's harder. And since a plane needs air to fly, it becomes increasingly difficult. And if you take a passenger plane and go 55,000 feet, it will actually slow down the plane. So you won't be going 500 miles per hour, you'll be going 450 miles per hour. You decrease a lot. And, time is money at that point. So that's why airlines don't go that high. But the reason why planes like SR-71 Blackbird and the F-16s, the reason why they can go that high is, one, they've got way more powerful engines, and two, they're a lot lighter, right? If you look at most airplanes, they're like over 100 tons. Some of these, like an F-16, for instance, is only like 60,000 pounds, which is a lot, yeah, but it's a lot less than a passenger jet, and it only has to carry like 2 people. So there's that. And then moving on, you have the sun, right? The sun is a huge part of it, because when the Concorde was flying in the air, it was above the clouds, as are most planes, yeah. But it was to the extent where there were no clouds at that level. 60,000 feet, there's not going to be a cloud in sight, except if you look down. So naturally, the sun would severely hit the airplane, which caused outside damage to the airplane. Just sun deterioration of like the body. But it also deteriorated the bodies of the passengers in some cases, where some people would get off the plane and develop sun cancer or various other types of cancer caused by the sun. And so that was extremely dangerous. And you look at the use of clouds, and clouds are designed to, sort of shield you from the sun. They keep our Earth's atmosphere and the heat inside, so it's more manageable. But at that height, you have to come up with some sort of sun protection, which at the time they didn't think of, and so many people developed cancer. The next step is the cost. So with bigger engines, with more powerful engines, comes the cost of fuel, right? That's going to be the biggest cost, because if the cost of fuel is high, then you have to charge a lot of money for passengers, so you can make up that difference. And the thing was, these planes, like the Concorde, for instance, which flew 1,200 miles per hour, so more than double the speed of normal jets, that would burn off fuel at such an incredibly high rate, to the point where it made normal airplane tickets seem cheap. These Concorde tickets were thousands of dollars for a couple of hour difference, so most people didn't see it worth their money or their time. They'd just spend the extra 3 hours on a normal airplane for a fraction of the price. And when you look at those speeds at which it's going at, it's burning fuel at an immensely quick rate. So that was one other factor. The second factor correlating to that was pilot cost, right? Pilots make like 60 grand a year on average, right? They're pretty well paid. Some 75 up to 100 I think they can make. And that's a salary. But if the airplanes can only be flown every couple of days, then that salary starts to outweigh the cost of profit. So what I mean by this is an airplane could fly regularly, right? It doesn't matter how many times it flies, but it matters how many times a pilot can fly. And so if a pilot flew a Concorde at those heights, he was required to stay on Earth, land, for 4 to 5 days afterwards, so the effects of high altitude travel could wear off and he'd be stable again. So if you've got pilots going back and forth, but they have to wait 4 to 5 days every single time, it starts to become very cost inefficient. And so airlines that had the Concorde were struggling to have the demand for this, and they're struggling to pay pilots while still making money. So that was a huge issue, because now people were wanting to fly high speed at times, but they'd have to hire so many different pilots. So instead of like a normal airline where they could maybe fly every 1 to 2 days, now you have to pay like double that in salaries so that you can have people safely recover from high altitude flying, and so that you can get another jet in the air. And so that's another cost factor, which is immense, and it essentially put the plane out of business most of all. It wasn't necessarily the other bad factors of the plane, it was mainly the cost, because at the end of the day, cost is everything. And so our last and final thing is the sonic booms. Now, if you don't know what a sonic boom is, it's essentially where you breach the sound barrier. And you do this by going 736 miles per hour, which means once you go faster than that, sound can no longer keep up with how fast you're going. So it makes like an explosion. And if you look on YouTube or other places, you could see airplanes that have actually broke the sound barriers. And the sound sounds like multiple gunshots. Like it's a very loud, very bizarre noise. And people don't like noise, so that proved to be another concept of this issue. Now, in the airplane, you won't hear the sonic boom because you're moving at that speed. So since you're traveling faster than the sound, you cannot hear the sound. So it's just basic physics. And the thing was, people on land could hear the boom. So when you've got a plane traveling at supersonic speeds, it's not just an initial boom, right? It's the boom, and the boom continues for as long as the plane is flying at supersonic speeds. And so the people on the ground, especially like farmers and stuff like that, they'd hear this boom in the middle of their workforce or their work day. And it's not like a subtle boom you'd hear. It's like this roaring boom that echoes for miles and miles and miles. And that angered farmers. They didn't like listening to it. It would wake up all their livestock. And in some cases, it was reported that livestock would go mentally insane. They'd somehow kill themselves. It was like a huge mess. And people just started hating supersonic plane noises more than anything. They were open for the idea of supersonic travel. They just hated the noise because wherever the plane went, the noise followed. And with supersonic booms, you have the environmental factor. So environmentalists who were studying the atmosphere of the Earth and the effects of sonic booms and fuel consumption and everything that has to do with this plane, they were worried that if airplanes came to a point where they were regularly breaking the sound barrier and regularly traveling at those high speeds, the increase in burn of fuel and the increase in sonic booms would have a bad effect on the atmosphere, and it can release extra harmful emissions into the air, which could eventually affect breathing on Earth and numerous other plants and ecological failures. And although it may not have happened immediately, it would have happened eventually. And so sadly, the FAA banned supersonic travel. but that was not before the Concorde was banned. It was only after the Concorde was banned that supersonic booms over land were banned, and they did that so that people can have peace of mind during the day, and so they don't have to listen to booms all day. But supersonic planes were still allowed, and are still allowed today, to fly over the ocean, because no one lives in the ocean. And that was a huge factor. But the thing is, everyone hears this Concorde plane crash, and they think this plane crash was the end of the Concorde. Now, I talked with a pilot who's been in the cockpit of several Concordes, and he said that the pilot controls are very crammed together. The cockpit is very, very tight, and apparently he's heard from other pilots, and I've also heard from like documentaries and stuff, that this airplane was incredibly difficult to land because it was very torpedo shaped. It was supposed to sort of be like a missile in the air, and so it was very hard for it to realign as quickly or do other things that basic wider planes may be able to do with ease. So there was that factor. It was hard to land, and at high speeds it was incredibly difficult to control when it started to get out of control. So if you don't know the story with this Concorde, I'm not sure of the exact date, but basically what happened was this normal passenger jet took off, and a piece of the plane fell on the runway, and for some reason, the flight control tower and the command center and everywhere, they didn't see this, so they sent the Concorde after it. And so the Concorde, it would, take off at much faster speeds than regular passenger jets, because it was lighter and more powerful. And so this thing, the Concorde, it hit this thing on the runway, and when it hit it, something on the plane just caught fire. And from my understanding, the pilots did not know that something had hit them or caught fire, and also they probably had hit the phase called V1. So there's a phase on the runway when you're taking off a plane. It's called V1, and that's essentially the point of no turning back. You just don't have enough time to brake to stop the airplane. You're going to crash. So they say V1 because if you have anything wrong, you still have to take off, but just make an emergency landing. It's standard protocol. So that could have also been a factor, but essentially when this plane took off, it was like immediately ignited in flames. The pilots tried to make an emergency landing, but they couldn't. So sadly, the plane crashed on top of a building, which caused a horrific crash site and explosion, and over 100 people died that day. But, I wondered this myself. Other planes have crashed numerous times. Why would one plane crash from the world's fastest jet, commercial jet, cause all of them to go out of business? And through my research, I found that it wasn't necessarily the crash that put the plane out of business. It was just an excuse to put the plane out of business because companies were seeing it as an effective mode of travel, and an ineffective mode of travel. I don't know if you heard that. And, they weren't making much money. So this was sort of an excuse, like, get the public to think it's dangerous, and it's an easy way out. They don't have to explain it or have anger from anyone else. And so that's pretty much the sum of why supersonic jets and supersonic travel ended. It was cost, it was the sun rays, and it was the sonic booms. All those three combined was the ruin of supersonic travel today, and that's why we have to wait hours and hours and hours on an airplane to go anywhere. But the future is coming, and it may be sooner than you think. So now airplane companies like Virgin Galactic, which also specializes in spaceflight, you also have Boeing, and you also have a company called Aerion, and they're all coming out with new supersonic jets. And the one that will be released the soonest, supposedly, is the Aerion supersonic jet. And these jets do go faster than what the Concorde was going. Some go, I think, over Mach 2. And those are incredible speeds, over 1,500 miles per hour. But the same question for them that they're having difficulties with is how to avoid the sonic boom. So similar to the design of, the stealth bomber plane and the Boeing 747, these airlines are sort of taking their shapes and merging them together almost. Like some of the pictures look very similar, and although these are just renderings, the plane may look different. This is what we know so far. And these planes, they're supposed to be shaped like that because they believe if they can make the surface of the airplane more smoother so that the wind can pass over more easily, that the sonic boom will be quieter because it's less of a breach into the sound barrier. It's essentially just smaller matter. And so the idea is that when they're going supersonic speeds, there will be a sonic boom, but it will be so quiet and the airplane's so high that you wouldn't be able to hear it on the ground. And a sonic boom, it can be heard from 5 miles away, up and down all around. And so if it's quieter and the plane is higher, then you're not going to hear it. But they're still having troubles with the science and the funding. But it is coming into action. Like if you look at NetJets, which is a company that specializes in partial ownership of airplanes, they've already made an inquiry to get 20 Aerion supersonic jets. And the supposed release date is 2028. So, who knows? Supersonic travel may be sooner than you think, and we'll be able to get places faster than ever. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please let us know in the comments if you liked it, if there's something different you'd like to see or any suggestions. Please also let me know in the comments. But thank you for watching.